Hello, folks, welcome to the lymphatic system chapter. This is going to be chapter 23, and most people don't really know too much about the lymphatic system, and they might have heard about lymph nodes and tonsils, and that's pretty much it. So for the most part, circulatory system and digestive system and reproductive system, those get most of the attention in terms of anatomy and physiology. So let's go into this chapter. Sometimes we run out of time and we don't have time to cover it, but I'm gonna go ahead and put this in the course. So the lymphatic system is going to be comprised of a bunch of tubes. It's a network of lymphatic vessels. So this is going to be a network of lymphatic vessels, and their job is to move the fluid. And it moves this fluid through the body. That's called lymph. So the fluid is called lymph, and you have lymph nodes. And lymph is a fluid basically similar to the plasma that we talked about for the blood chapter that you find in blood, but it has different function. In addition to the lymphatic vessels, there's going to be some organs and some tissues that are going to surround your digestive system and also your respiratory system. So these are going to be the lymph nodes and some of the major organs like thymus gland and tonsils and spleen and some those organs, they're going to be, so these lymph nodes are going to be in the digestive system and your respiratory system. And then we talked about the lymphocytes in the blood chapter. So the reason why it's called lymphocytes is because they're very intimately connected to the lymphatic system. So we're going to talk about these three kinds of lymphocytes that look different depending on what type they are and if they are mature or immature when you look at a blood smear. So the first part that's talking about is the lymphatic vessels and what they are. The first thing you need to understand that the circulatory system is, that's your blood, that's your arterial and venous circuit. So in your blood vessels, you have fluid that leaks out sometimes, and the fluid leaks out of your arteries and your veins, and it goes into your tissues. So that's why that a fluid is called interstitial fluid. So this word here, interstitial. The word inter means, you already know, I wrote this many times. Inter means between. And the word stitional in this case means tissues. So when this fluid leaks out of your blood vessels, they end up going between your cells, your tissues, and your muscles and muscle tissue and things of that sort. So that'll be bad unless you can return this fluid back to the circulatory system. And that's the job of the lymphatic vessels. So that's what they do. They basically absorb all the interstitial fluid, and then they can return it back to the circulatory system. So they move it back towards the heart and then dump that back into the heart. So what if your body cannot move the lymph? So this interstitial fluid, which is called the lymph, what if your body just can't move it? And then there are some examples of, let me see here, this way. So there are some examples here. So there is a disease called elephantitis, and itis means inflammation. I think I spelled it wrong, but that's when your body cannot move the fluid back into the circulatory system. So this interstitial fluid that's called lymph, your body cannot go ahead and move it back to the circulatory system. Then it's going to build up in the tissues, and that's what's called elephantitis. And that's because you got the issues with the lymphatic tissue, and they're not able to remove all of the fluid in the leg, and the leg becomes enlarged like this, almost like elephant's foot. So that's where the name is coming from. And this can oftentimes happen if you're infected with mosquitoes and all kinds of diseases that can be transmitted, and their side effects. One of these diseases is going to be elephantitis. But it doesn't have to be always that case. It can be due to genetics, not due to maybe you're infected with some type of disease. So it can just damage the lymphatic system due to other causes as well. But anyway, so if there is a problem with the lymphatic system, it's gonna cause swelling, for example, in the leg here, and you will have to basically drain it, and draining it basically goes into the lymphatic vessels, and then will drain and put it back into the circulatory system. But the healthy circulatory system, it returns it back to the um, healthy lymphatic system returns the fluid back to the circulatory system. So here we have slides of about functions of the lymphatic system. So lymphatic system is part of the immune system. And this goes back to when I was talking about different types of lymphocytes. So you have three kinds of lymphocytes. You have the NK lymphocytes, which are natural killer lymphocytes, B lymphocytes, and then T lymphocytes. So these are main types. These can turn into some precursors and some transitional ones, but these are the three we're going to talk about. We only give you the example of these in the blood chapter. So these three are going to be major kinds, and all these come from the same origin. Hopefully you remember the word pluripotent stem cells. These stem cells can turn into some other specific type of cells, certain type of cells, and then in the bone marrow, depending on what kind of hormone you're hitting it with, either you can make more erythrocytes, and that's for EPO, erythropoietin. That's the hormone that comes from the kidneys. If you want to make more leukocytes, then it's leukopoietin. That's going to make some leukocytes. One of those leukocytes will be T lymphocytes. One will be natural killer or NK cells, NK lymphocytes, and another one B lymphocytes, depending on what your body needs at a time. So the other major function of the lymphatic system is immune function. It has these lymphocytes that go and find things that don't belong in your body and then attack them. So they will generate antibodies or that will attack them. And the other function is returning the fluid to your circulatory system. Because you don't want to accumulate all that fluid in your leg or your lymphatic vessels. So they have these capillaries that are very similar to circulatory system. These capillaries will have lots of surface area. So that's showing the capillaries, lymphatic capillaries, ones in green. That's not the actual color of them. This is just for the purpose of understanding them. So they have lots of surface area, and they're going to be in your tissues, your muscles, your organs, and things of that sort. And they're going to absorb all of the interstitial fluid that leaks out of the blood vessels. And once it absorbs it, it's going to, what's going to happen is lymphatic capillaries are going to merge, and they're going to basically merge into the collecting vessels, and then the collecting vessels become trunks and ducts. So these are your lymphatic capillaries, and you'll notice that there's lots, it's like a web here, and then they start merging. Once they merge, it's called a lymphatic collecting vessels, and they do have valves, so we're going to talk about that as well. And then it merges into lymphatic trunks and ducts, and this part here is called the lymph node. So these are going to merge, and hopefully you remember the word for merging is anastomosis. Anastomos means to merge. I have that written out on a slide as well. It's gonna come up in a second. So when you got two blood vessels or two lymphatic vessels merging, they turn into one large vessel, and that's the opposite of arteries. Arteries go away from the heart. So arteries, they're going to split, and the veins, they go towards the heart, so small little venules will merge together, become veins, and then the veins will merge together, turn into vena cava. So same thing happens here. Lymphatic capillaries, they merge together, and they turn into these lymphatic collecting vessels. And then these merge together to turn into lymphatic ducts and lymphatic trunks. So this is called anastomosis. We do have one example of artery going through anastomosis, and that's going to be a cerebral arterial circle. That's going to be circle of Willis we talked about when you read that chapter. Maybe you studied that. So that's going to be merging of arteries surrounding the pituitary gland. Here's a close-up of the capillaries. So the green ones here are the lymphatic capillaries. Again, it's not green in real life. They're just color coded. Just being green means it's kind of referring to lymph vessels, and blue and red we have for that blood vessels. But even though we have blue and red for the blood vessels, that's not real life. So red is just representing oxygenated blood, and blue is representing deoxygenated blood. So that's just for us to understand. It's color coded. So you got these capillaries that are going to absorb this interstitial fluid, and then from there you can see that they are merging. So it's going in this direction, and they're going to merge here. So they're have from the capillaries in the lymphatic vessel, they're merging and they are going through the anastomosis. Once they get to the heart, they're going to dump all the fluid back into the blood, and then it's going to replenish your blood volume. And when you do a cross section, this is showing a cross section. When you cut into the vessels, it's just showing an artery, a vein, and a lymphatic vessel. We study the arteries and we know that they have much thicker walls. The veins, they have much thinner walls due to the fact that there's less muscle. The lymphatic vessels, if you look at it, does it look similar to this or this? To me, it looks it's similar to the veins because they're also very floppy. They're also under low pressure, and they are not going to have thick wall of muscle that you have in the arteries. So the big difference in both is the veins and lymphatic vessels. They have walls. They have it's showing this little triangular thing here. So that's a valve actually. And just like your heart chambers, you also have valves there. The venous system have valves, and hopefully you remember the function of the valves is to prevent the fluid from going backwards, and you want to make sure the fluid always goes in one direction. So that's the reason you have valves. So let's put all this in writing. The lymphatic capillaries are very similar to blood capillaries. Their job is to have lots of surface area. They're very permeable. They're very thin. And because the cells are very thin, it includes all kinds of stuff, pathogens, debris, cancer cells. So your own lymphocytes will go and find the cancer cells and destroy them. This will break down, they'll break them down into debris maybe. So debris, if you're not familiar with the word, it means junk, garbage. So once it breaks down those cells, it just used to describe the broken down stuff. So the leftover after the cells die, that's what debris is. So these are going to be made up of endothelial cells. Endothelial cells overlap to form one-way mini valves. The word mini valves doesn't mean they're small valves. Okay, so I want you to remember that. So these are made up of endothelial cells. So if you remember, epithelium and endothelium is the same thing. The only difference is one is on top, the other one, epithelium is top layer of your skin, and endothelium is going to be the inner lining or the inside of something. So let's say you got yourself a capillary. It's a tube lining the inside, and that would be endothelial cells. If you have on the outside, like your skin, that's epithelium cells. But for the most part, they're going to look pretty, they're going to look the same because it's a very thin layer. Okay, so this is just showing you again the capillary bed of a lymphatic system. So lymphatic capillaries that are going to drain into lymphatic vessels and then lymphatic trunks and ducts. This is showing you the valve. Okay, this is a close-up here. So this is going to be the lymph capillaries, and they're nicely integrated. And so they're nicely integrated between the blood capillaries right here. You can see that. And if the fluid is leaking from the blood capillaries around the tissues, it's going to allow it to absorb the fluid and bring it back by using these mini valves. And again, mini valves doesn't mean small valves. I know you want to think that. The word mini means little, but that's not what it means here. They are not little valves. So these valves here are overlapping. This is showing the valves. They're overlapping. So if you go on your roof and you got shingle roof, those overlap, right? So what's underneath the shingles is the tiles on or the tiles of your roof. There's this space. There's gap. If gravity was an issue, the rainwater would actually make their way into the gap. So you have rainwater come down, they'll go into the gap and be absorbed. So that's what's happening here. Mini valves of your lymphatic vessels, gravity is not an issue. So the gap that you see here does absorb, literally, it just absorbs the interstitial fluid. So the fluid will actually go inside the lymphatic vessels through these gaps. So it comes inside. So that fluid is coming from the circulatory system, anything that's leaking out. Because the gravity usually brings the rainwater down, and the water doesn't go underneath the roof or the gaps. That way shingles does its job, but it's not how it works inside your body. We have these mini valves, and the fluid does actually leak in underneath. So that's one kind of valve that's there. There's one more type, and this is a longitudinal section. That is a lymphatic, that's just a regular lymphatic valve. So here we have a longitudinal section of a lymphatic vessel cut. So longitudinal section is long ways, and you can see that there's this little triangle here, triangle shaped thing. That's a lymphatic valve. It's going to make sure the fluid inside is only going in one direction. And even if you squeeze your muscles, it wants to go backwards, but it can't do that because the valve is preventing it from going backwards. So let's review what we have. We got yourself our capillaries. That's the lymphatic capillary. These are going to be very small, so the surface area is high. And these are going around your veins and your arteries because the blood vessels leak and they lose fluid. The fluid ends up going into your tissues. And that's why this is called interstitial fluid. It's between the tissues. And then in the tissues, the fluid will be absorbed by, so these arrows are showing that's being absorbed by the lymphatic vessels. And you can also see lymphatic vessels have these mini valves. That's what the fluid is going through to get inside the lymphatic vessels. And they also have the irregular type of valves that's preventing the backflow of the fluid. And it keeps going until eventually you head over to the heart and dumps it into the heart. So the lymphatic vessels, and the veins, they're very similar. They have very thin walls. They have valves. So they both have thin walls. They don't have thick muscle layer. They both have valves. So that's what's different compared to an artery. So there's this word again, anastomose. That means to merge. Again, the veins merge into the venules. They merge to become the veins, and then the capillaries merge into venules and then into veins and then into vena cava. So same thing is happening here with the lymphatic vessels. They go through anastomosis, they turn into bigger vessels, large vessels, and then they turn into ducts or trunks. So here on one side, you have the lymphatic vessels. On the other side, you have the circulatory system. And you remember, hopefully, that the arteries are deeper because they're under high pressure and the veins are closer to the surface. Lymphatic vessels, they go parallel with the arteries. So the vena cava, the aorta. The reason is why they're running parallel because the heart beats. When it beats, it causes the aorta to expand. So it causes your aorta to expand, and that's what your pulse is actually. When you feel a pulse, basically what's happening is your heart is beating, it's causing the blood pressure in your arteries to expand, and you can feel it as little pulses and bumps. So that's your pulse. So when your heart beats, it causes the aorta to expand because it's under high pressure, it's going to squeeze the lymphatic vessels, And by squeezing the vessels, you squish the fluid and the fluid will go in one direction. And also if you have valves, that's preventing it going from the other direction. So collecting vessels in the skin will travel with the superficial veins, and the deeper vessels travel with the arteries. So again, the ones traveling with the arteries, it's squeezing them, and the other ones are being squeezed by the muscles. You remember that I told you that the veins, they get squeezed, and that's how there was some velocity in the blood because they were getting squeezed by the muscles. So this is what your lymphatic trunks and ducts look like. You got this big one down here. This one is called cisterna chyli. Cisterna chyli. And then you have thoracic duct. In this area, that's your thorax. You have your right lymphatic duct here. And you'll have your inguinal lymph nodes on the bottom. So, and you also have some axillary lymph nodes. So the big one here is on the right and left. So the right lymphatic duct drains right upper arm and the right side of head and thorax. So because both of these, they have to drain two large portions of your body. For example, the right lymphatic duct, it's gonna drain the green area in this picture. I don't know why it's asymmetrical, but it is. So on the right side of your head, neck, upper torso, and right arm, that drains into your right lymphatic duct. And then it goes into your right subclavian, then dumps into superior vena cava. Then the thoracic duct that arises from the cisterna chyli drains the rest of the body. So as I mentioned before, thoracic duct has, because it's going through the thorax, that's where the name is coming from. And then there is this landmark, cisterna chyli. I showed you that in the last picture. So here's another image from the book. It's basically breaking your body down to two parts, tell you what's being drained by which one, right? It's right lymphatic duct is draining this area, and then the left, or the thoracic duct is draining this area. So here is that cisterna chyli. So this is a landmark. It's basically an enlargement of these vessels, elevating these lymphatic vessels, and it's beginning of the thoracic duct. So after the cisterna chyli, you have the thoracic duct. So that's a big enlargement that's gonna go to the thoracic duct, and then you have your, after thoracic duct, you have your right lymphatic duct here. So it's gonna be a little bit harder to find, but what you gotta do is you gotta find the cisterna chyli first. That's easy to find, and then use that as your landmark, and then from there you can find the thoracic duct and then your right lymphatic duct. Here's another image, and this is basically eliminating all the other things to help you kind of focus. So you have the right lymphatic duct right here, and then you also have your cisterna chyli. That's right there. That's going up. So here's another picture. So that's your cisterna chyli. It's going up. Got your thorax duct going up. And you have your right lymphatic duct in this area, and your thorax duct that's draining this part of your body. So what I want you to notice is you'll see that as it's going up, this is your superior vena cava, and this is running parallel to superior vena cava. So there, that's your right lymphatic duct, and that's your superior vena cava. So there's going to be two places right here. One is this one. That's where the entrance is going to be for the lymph that goes back to the circulatory system. So when you see where the lymphatic duct is going, or the trunk is going to be, it's going to be connected here to the right subclavian trunk, and subclavian means under the clavicle. So lymph from the right side of the head and the right arm is going to join the circulatory system here. So if you follow the cisterna chyli and move all the way up, there's going to be the thoracic duct, and that's going to be connected. That's going to be dumping all the left side under the left subclavian. So so it's going to dump all the contents in the right atrium. So these two will merge into superior vena cava. So cisterna chyli, so right there. So that's where it's dumping all the contents back into the superior vena cava, but that's under left subclavian. Okay, so that's the thoracic duct that begins at cisterna chyli, which is right here. So that's your beginning of, that's your landmark, and that's beginning of your thoracic duct. Just gonna collect all the lymph from the below, and it's gonna go and put the fluid back into the circulatory system up here. Okay, so as I mentioned before, there are valves. For the same reason, the veins have valves. The blood in veins is moved by contractions of your muscles and arteries. So same thing happens with the lymphatic vessels. You got lymphatic vessels with the valves. And whenever your muscles contract or whenever your aorta expands, that's going to push against the lymphatic vessel, and that's going to propel and cause the lymph to go in one direction. The direction which it goes in is going to go back to your circulatory system, and that's it's going to where it's going to replenish your blood. So pulsations of nearby arteries, contractions of smooth muscle in the walls of lymphatics is what's going to move the lymph. So the direction of lymph fluid in capillaries is one direction. The lymph enters through these mini valves, and then there are valves inside the lymph, like this one here, that's gonna keep it from flowing backwards. Next part of the lecture is we have lymphoid cells. So I'm gonna make another video for that one. I'm gonna stop this one here. Thank you for listening.